On a sleet, gray Wednesday in February of 1992, Raymond Sutter set 3 diesel injection pumps on a wooden bench in his machine shed, and understood in one quiet second that a man could own 3 tractors and still have no way to farm. The tractors were sitting 20 feet away, all 3 of them International 1466s, red paint dulled by dust and years, hoods raised like broken jaws. They were not destroyed. They were not even worn out, in the way dealers like to say old tractors were worn out. But without those pumps, they were dead iron. Dead iron. And the strange thing was that the pumps looked too small to be carrying that much consequence. Each one fit in the space between Raymond's hands and elbows. Cast housing, fuel lines, governor cover, a tag wired to the mounting flange. 3 compact pieces of machinery with the power to stop 620 acres of Pawnee County, Nebraska, from getting planted on time. Raymond did not say that out loud. He was not a dramatic man. He wrote 3 numbers on 3 paper tags, tied the tags with baling wire, wrapped the pumps in freezer paper, and carried them into the old grain room behind the shop. That shelf was where his family kept things that were too useful to throw away, and too misunderstood to explain. By the end of that winter, people in the county would decide Raymond Sutter was finished. They would see 3 red tractors sitting open in his shed and assume the story was already writing itself. Older farmer, old iron, too much repair cost, not enough money. They were wrong, but Raymond was going to let them be wrong for a while. The trouble started with a fuel barrel. Raymond had farmed the same ground outside Table Rock since he came home from the Army in 1961. Not big ground by Nebraska standards, but it was enough to raise corn, soybeans, winter wheat, and 2 children who understood machinery before they understood algebra. He bought his first International 1466 in 1978. The second came in 1980 from an estate sale near Beatrice. The third came in 1983 after a neighbor retired and wanted the machine to stay close enough that he could still hear it during planting. Raymond liked them because they were strong, simple, and honest about what was wrong with them. No computer, no mystery module under the cab, no machine that needed a man with a laptop to tell you why fuel was not becoming fire. Just steel, compression, timing. In January of 1992, a delivery of winter diesel went into a storage tank behind Raymond's shop. The tank was old but not neglected. He drained water off the bottom every month. He changed filters. He kept fuel treatment on the shelf. He did what a careful man does. But that winter had been ugly. Freeze, thaw, rain, freeze again. Water found its way into places it should not have been. A little rust broke loose inside the tank. Fine grit went through the first filter before Raymond knew he had a problem. The first tractor began surging under load while Raymond was hauling ground feed. The second started hard 3 days later and smoked gray even after it warmed. The third lost power pulling wagons from a neighbor's place and came home sounding like a man trying to breathe through a wet rag. 3 pumps, contaminated and scarred, inside 1 month. Raymond hauled the first tractor to Graham Equipment, 34 miles east, then the second, then the third. The service manager, Jerry Moss, told him what the dealership always told men with older machines. The safe answer was replacement. New pump assemblies, injector service, labor, pickup, return, shop supplies, taxes. The numbers sat on the invoice like fence posts in hard ground. $4,100 for the first tractor, if nothing else turned up. 3 tractors meant more than $12,000. Raymond had $6,300 in the operating account, and most of that already had seed written on it. He had land taxes due in March. He had fertilizer priced and not yet paid. The math did not bend because a dealership printed it on clean paper. Jerry Moss did not mean to insult him. He believed he was giving professional advice. "These old 1466s will nickel and dime you to death," he said. "Stop patching and move on." Raymond looked through the shop door at his own tractors sitting under fluorescent light. "They ran fine before the fuel went bad," he said. Jerry shrugged. "Fine until they didn't." That sentence stayed with Raymond all the way home. Fine until they didn't. It sounded practical. It also sounded like the kind of thing a man said when he was done thinking. Raymond came back the next morning with his gooseneck trailer and hauled the tractors home unrepaired. Jerry made a note on the service ticket. Customer declined repair. Units released as is. By the following Sunday, Raymond had all 3 pumps off. He did not rush the work. He cleaned the mounting areas first. He marked the timing positions with a scribe and a cold chisel. He capped the lines with scraps of clean hose. He set each bolt in a coffee can with masking tape on the side. The first pump took him half a day because he worked like a man diffusing something. The second took 3 hours. The third took less than 2. His wife Darlene brought him coffee after church and stood in the shed doorway. "Are they ruined?" she asked. Raymond wiped fuel from his fingers. "I don't know yet." That was the most honest answer in the building. He spent Monday on the phone, not to neighbors, not to the dealership. Most honest answer in the building. He spent Monday on the phone. Not to neighbors, not to the dealership, to men who still knew fuel systems as mechanical objects instead of catalog numbers. One call went to a retired diesel man in Fairbury named Emil Novak. Another went to a pump shop in Lincoln. A third went to a farmer near Falls City who had rebuilt 2 old case pumps after a flood year and had not paid a dealer a dime. By nightfall, Raymond had learned what mattered. The pump housings were probably not ruined. The damage was likely in plungers, delivery valves, governor bushings, and seals. Upper fuel shop could clean, measure, rebuild, and bench test each pump for a fraction of replacement cost. Injector nozzles could be serviced, lines could be flushed. The engines themselves were almost certainly fine. The problem was not that the tractors were old. The problem was that the quote treated one damaged system as proof that the whole machine had expired. The Lincoln shop could take one pump in March, one after spring rush, one in late summer. Parts and bench labor would land somewhere around $500 per pump if nothing unusual appeared. Add injector work, filters, seals, fuel tank cleaning, and Raymond figured the whole disaster could be repaired for just under $2,000. The dealership invoice had been more than $12,000. The catch was time. Planting did not care that Raymond had discovered a better answer. Spring was coming with its usual indifference. Corn needed to go in when the ground said go. Wheat needed attention. A farm does not pause because a man finds a cheaper path through trouble. So Raymond chose the slower path anyway. He borrowed an old Alice from his cousin for field work. He traded labor instead of cash. He planted later than he liked and slept less than he should have. He sent one pump to Lincoln and left the other two wrapped on the grain room shelf with their tags still wired tight. This is the part people saw. They saw 3 red tractors sitting open. They saw Raymond running borrowed horsepower. They saw him buying filters and gasket paper instead of signing the dealer ticket. And because this was farm country in 1992, and because the 1980s had taught everyone to look for financial trouble in the posture of a neighbor's equipment, they built a story around him without asking if the story was true. Jerry Moss heard it too. Harry Moss heard it too. At the co-op, someone mentioned that Raymond still had those 1466s torn apart. Jerry said, not cruelly, just with the confidence of a man defending his own estimate, he should have let us do it right. If he can't afford those repairs, he's got bigger problems than fuel pumps. That sentence traveled farther than Jerry intended. Raymond heard it by Easter. Darlene asked if he wanted to say something. Raymond was checking a fuel filter element against the light. No, he said. A running tractor will say it better. The first 1466 started in June. It did not roar to life like a movie. Raymond would have hated that. It cranked, caught unevenly, smoked for a few seconds, then settled into a clean idle that made the loose sheet metal on the shed wall hum. He let it run for an hour before he touched the throttle, and he shut it down, checked every line fitting, checked timing, checked oil, checked coolant, started it again, and listened. Darlene came out and stood beside him. "Well?" she said. Raymond did not smile much, but the corner of his mouth moved. It remembers. By the fall of 1993, the second tractor was running. By the spring of 1994, the third was back in the field. The total cost in Raymond's ledger, including fuel tank cleaning, 3 pump rebuilds, injector service, seals, filters, and the Alice trade with his cousin was $2,187. He had not paid Graham equipment for the repair. He had not taken on new debt. And the three old internationals went back to doing the work they had always done. Raymond kept the damaged delivery valves, worn governor parts, extra injector lines, and every old pump tag in the grain room. Not because he needed broken parts, because he had learned something from them. A part that looks like scrap to one man may be evidence to another. That sentence was never written on the wall. It did not have to be. It became the rule of the room. Over the next decade, Raymond quietly built the shelves, a lift pump from a salvage yard in Kansas, a set of injector lines from a farm sale near Auburn, new old-stock filter bases still in faded cardboard, or housing wrapped in oil paper, 2 pump cores bought cheap from a man who had swapped engines and thought the old fuel parts were clutter. Raymond labeled everything. Red pencil for parts ready to use, black pencil for cores, blue pencil for pieces that needed a shop before they could go on a machine. His son Paul thought it was excessive when he was young. By 2004, Paul had come back to the farm after 11 years selling seed in Lincoln, and he understood more than he wanted to admit. New tractors had better cabs, better hydraulics, better lights, and price tags that could make a paid-for farm feel rented. He and Raymond had the same argument every winter. Would point to used Magnum tractors in auction listings. Raymond would point to the ledger. Paul would talk about comfort, acres per hour, resale value. Raymond would talk about debt, parts, tools, and whether a machine could be understood by the people depending on it. Neither man was entirely wrong. But the old 1466s kept starting. The rows kept getting planted. The notes at the bank kept getting paid. And over time, Paul stopped calling the shelves junk. He started calling them inventory. Graham Equipment closed in the summer of 2007. Not with scandal, not with a sheriff's auction, just consolidation. The manufacturer wanted fewer, larger dealers. Customers wanted bigger inventory and financing packages. The world moved in a direction a small-town dealership could not quite afford to follow. Harry Graham, whose father had opened the place in 1959, had a back room full of parts nobody at the new regional store wanted. Common items were transferred. Current stock was boxed and counted. But the old international fuel system pieces sat in one corner like they had been waiting for a man with Raymond's kind of memory. Pump cores, nozzle tips, line clamps, shut-off levers, a bench test adapter, boxes with part numbers that no one under 40 recognized without looking them up. Harry called 2 salvage yards. One offered weight price. The other said they were not interested. A parts man at the co-op said, "Sutter still runs those old red tractors. He might be crazy enough to want them." Harry drove out on a hot August afternoon. Raymond was in the shop sharpening mower blades. He was 73 then, slower in the knees, exact in the hands. Harry told him what was left. Raymond listened without changing expression. "How many pump cores?" he asked. 7. "Complete?" "Mostly." "Any cracked housings?" "Not that I can see." "What about the nozzle boxes?" "I'll throw them in if you take the whole pile." They settled at $740 for everything. Harry helped load the parts into Paul's pickup. The pump cores were heavier than they looked. Each one landed in the bed with a dull metal thud. When they were done, Harry stood beside the truck and looked into the open machine shed. The 3 1466s were lined up inside, older, faded, unmistakably alive. Harry said, "Jerry used to say you were in trouble back in '92. Fix 'em." Raymond folded the tailgate up. "I could afford a repair," he said. "I just couldn't afford his thinking." Harry did not answer right away. Then he nodded, as if the sentence had explained more than the invoice ever had. Raymond carried the pump cores into the grain room and put them on the shelf beside the 3 tagged pumps from 1992. The room did not look impressive. No sign, no display, no ceremony. Just parts, labels, and the stubborn quiet of things saved before anyone else needed them. 4 years later, someone else did need them. In the spring of 2011, a farmer named Lowell Brandt came to Raymond with a 1486 that would not hold fuel pressure. Lowell farmed north of Humboldt and had expanded too fast during a good price year. Then fertilizer jumped. Then a rented quarter fell through. Then his main tractor failed 2 weeks before planting. The regional dealer told him the pump would need to go out, maybe 6 weeks, maybe more if parts were delayed. The estimate was high enough that Lowell sat in his pickup outside the bank for 20 minutes before driving home without going inside. Somebody told him to call Raymond. Lowell did not ask for money. Proud men rarely do, even when money is the thing on fire. He asked if Raymond knew anything about older international pumps. Raymond listened. Asked about smoke. Asked about throttle response. Asked about filters. Asked whether the return line was clear. Then he said, "Bring it here." The 1486 came in on a lowboy the next morning. Paul watched his father move around that tractor like a man walking through a room he had built himself. Raymond did not guess. He verified. Fuel flow first. Filters. Lift pump. Return restriction. Timing marks. Then the injection pump. The failure was not identical to 1992. It did not need to be. The shelf was not magic. It was capacity. Raymond had a compatible core. He had nozzle parts. Beck's former apprentice in Lincoln, now running the pump bench. He had the torque specs, the timing notes, the habit of writing down what mattered. and the patience to keep a frightened man from making an expensive mistake. The tractor was running in 4 days. Lowell tried to pay Raymond for his time. Raymond charged him for parts at cost and wrote the transaction in the ledger. For labor, he told Lowell to help Paul bale waterways in June. That was the rate. Word moved, as it always does where roads are few, and everybody knows what a cold start sounds like. Over the next 6 years, Raymond helped with 9 fuel system jobs. Not all were his tractors. Not all were internationals. A case with a contaminated tank. A deer with a sticky pump rack. An old white that needed a pump shop more than it needed a dealer. Raymond did not pretend every machine was the same, but he knew how to slow panic down until the real failure showed itself. By then, Paul understood what the grain room was. It was not nostalgia. It was not hoarding. It was a map of future emergencies drawn by someone who had survived one already. Raymond died in November of 2017 at 83 after checking fuel filters in the morning and falling asleep in his chair after supper. The funeral filled more pews than Paul expected. Lowell Brandt was there. So were 2 brothers from Falls City, a widow whose hay tractor Raymond had helped save, and the pump man from Lincoln who drove down in rain and stood quietly near the back. Harry Graham came too. Jerry Moss did not. After the burial, Paul walked through the shop alone. The tractors were still there. The ledger was on Raymond's desk. The grain room shelves held pump cores, injector lines, boxes of old stock, red and black and blue pencil marks, and the first 3 paper tags from 1992, still wired to the pumps that had nearly stopped the farm. Paul opened a new ledger that winter. He wrote down the story from the beginning, not because he thought anyone would publish it, and not because his father needed to be made larger than he was. Raymond would have hated that. Paul wrote it down because knowledge not written becomes a rumor, and rumor is not strong enough to carry a repair across a generation. He called Harry. He called Lowell. He called the pump shop. He wrote the numbers, the years, the mistakes, the sources, the specs, the names of men who knew the work, and the year each one planned to retire. By the end of February, Paul had 51 pages. The lesson at the center was not complicated. The part you will need later is often the part someone is tired of storing now. The skill you will need later is often the skill the market has stopped rewarding. The relationship you will need later is the one you built before there was smoke coming out of the exhaust and a banker waiting by the phone. Paul kept farming. The 1466s kept running. The grain room kept getting more organized. Then came 2022, and Raymond's granddaughter Clara came home. Clara had an agricultural systems degree from Kansas State, a sharper eye for spreadsheets than anyone in the family, and her grandfather's distrust of a solution that only worked when everything else worked too. She was not against new technology. She used mapping software. She understood electronics. She could diagnose sensor faults that would have made Raymond stare at the machine like it had started speaking French. But she had read all 3 ledgers, and she knew that every generation of equipment eventually becomes old iron. The only question is whether someone has prepared for that moment before the parts counter stops caring. Parts counter stops caring. That winter, Clara walked into the kitchen with a folder and a laptop. She had been studying the tractors that farmers were now treating as dependable middle-aged machines. Early Magnums, older Maxims, late mechanical diesels with just enough electronics to make parts harder and just enough steel to stay useful for decades. She had a list of likely failure points. Not guesses, failure points. Electronic hitch controllers, hydraulic remotes, cab relays, fuel shutoff solenoids, sensor harnesses, mechanical pump pieces that were still available but trending thin, shops that could repair boards, mechanics who knew the machines before laptops became the first tool out of the truck. Paul read the spreadsheet at the same table where Raymond had once written down the cost of 3 pump rebuilds on a yellow legal pad. Clara waited. She did not oversell it. She did not call it a business. She did not call it a legacy. She said, "These are the shelves before they become empty." Paul sat with that for a long time. Then he said yes. The parts began arriving in March. Not piles, not panic buying, purposeful pieces, labeled, logged, wrapped, stored where heat and moisture would not ruin them. Clara's handwriting does not look like Raymond's. Her labels are cleaner. Her spreadsheet backs up to a cloud account Raymond would not have trusted, and Paul barely understands. But the work is the same. A shelf is just a shelf until the road between need and supply washes out. Then it becomes a bridge. The dealership is gone. The estimate is gone. The service manager's certainty is gone. Most of the men who knew those pumps by touch are gone too. But in a grain room in Pawnee County, there are still pump cores on the shelf, still tagged, still waiting. Not because an old farmer refused to move on, because he understood that useful things do not become worthless when the market gets bored with them. They become quiet, and sometimes, if somebody has the patience to keep them, they become the only answer left.